Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, October the 8th, 2025. And this is our series that we've been doing periodically as the situation called for it for now 2 years. 2 years ago, in October of 2023, the nation of Israel was celebrating one of the biblical feasts that they are commanded to keep, the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Booths, a week-long feast where they're celebrating the fact that when they wandered in the wilderness for those 40 years and they had to have temporary shelters everywhere they went, that no matter where they were, no matter what kind of circumstances they were in, God was with them. He made his presence known in the pillar of fire at night that provided warmth and light for them, in the cloud covering by day that prevented them from experiencing the worst effects of the desert sun's rays burning their skin. They experienced it through God providing the manna, the food in the wilderness, from his leading them from place to place to find the water that they needed for themselves and their animals to be able to continue to live, and for the fact that anywhere they went, God was always right there with them. And so they're celebrating this holiday, and they end up that holiday on the very last day. They add an additional day to the feast called Simcha, which means joy, Torah. What they've been doing is they have been reading through the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of the law, Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And they finish up at the Feast of Tabernacles with the end of Deuteronomy, and then the next day they start back at Genesis 1:1, and they start reading through the Bible every year over and over. Kind of like a lot of us in modern Christianity. On January the 1st, we may get a read through the Bible in the year plan that's got it charted out for us on which books and chapters to read, so that we're covering both the Old and the New Testament. And in the course of a year, we've read all the way through the books of the Bible. And it was that holiday, Simchat Torah, the day after Tabernacles, when the entire nation would be at rest and celebrating, that terrorists chose to attack, and they killed over 1,200 people. And they didn't just kill them, they butchered them in very, very brutal ways, showing no mercy to the very young, the very old. Babies were literally cooked alive in ovens. People were sexually assaulted. People's bodies were mutilated. Sometimes the bodies were carried back into Gaza to hold the dead body as a hostage, preventing the families from even being able to mourn their dead and give them a proper burial. And hostages were taken alive. And so since October the 7th of 2023, periodically we've done some updates here because of the biblical significance of what's happening in God's land, the struggle over who's going to control the land, over God working out his plan. And yesterday was the 2-year anniversary, and sure enough, there's yet another proposed ceasefire peace deal that is being looked at right now. And we don't know as of this moment, it's 4 p.m. Central Time on October the 8th, whether or not the peace deal that's been offered up is going to be accepted by the terrorists and the hostages be returned, or whether or not the killing will continue, the torture will continue. And it's important for us to stop and think about, in these last 2 years, even seeing how people were being brutalized, those who don't have the right kind of spiritual eyes and those who don't understand God's word have sided with the people who committed these atrocities and in some ways rewarded them. Some nations have actually recognized a quote, quote, Palestinian state when there's no Palestinian state. They're not trying to organize a government and set up schools and hospitals and provide for, roads and jobs and business and industry and cooperating with the world. No, their whole reason for existence is to kill people just because they're Jewish people. And some folks have managed to rationalize in the last 2 years that we're going to recognize the ones who have committed the crime and blame the actual victims. But because the anniversary is now upon us, yesterday started the 2-year anniversary, some of the videos that are showing up on news feeds and in social media are showing some of the brutality that happened. And a lot of times, the brutality has to be either pixelated so that you don't see the utter depravity of what's going on, what was done to human beings, people made in the image of God. But doing the best you can to get the truth out of it. This is what happened to these people. This is what is still happening to people. Of the original 200 or so living hostages that were carried into the Gaza Strip, the best estimate and signs of proof of life are that about 20 of them are still alive. And when we've been given proof of life, photographs or they're paraded in front of cameras, these people look like folks coming out of the World War II era prisoner of war camps that the Japanese had, or the Holocaust camps that the German regime imposed on the world. And some people are looking at the brutality and choosing to ignore it because they don't have the spiritual eyes to see God at work in history. God's people aren't always spared from suffering. His people aren't always spared from pain. We have many biblical passages that prophesy what's going to happen in the future in the end times that we are a part of. And anybody with a serious brain wanting to know God's truth can look at the things that were predicted in books like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and Revelation, and you interpret the nightly news that you see in the light of what God's Word, penned by human beings under God's inspiration, literally thousands of years ago, are coming to fruition right before our very eyes. One of the, actually several of the social media memories that popped up in my feed today involved friends and ministries that I'm familiar with who just happened to be in the nation of Israel in October 2 years ago. And all of a sudden, their plans to take tours or to lead ministry groups are thwarted, and they're having to huddle in the bomb shelters and run for cover as the rockets are coming in and the sirens are going off, and now they've got to figure out how to get back to their homes of origin because the airports are even closed. And there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress, but a lot of those people who were on the trips realized, for us, this is stressful, but eventually we'll be able to find a way to escape the war situation, maybe go through another country and take flights back to our home that way, or take a ship, or get out of the war zone, but that there are other people for whom that is home. People who are going to have to stay and be at risk from rocket attacks and from terrorist attacks. People who are going to have to put on uniforms and go and fight. Family members who are going to see their loved ones come home in flag-draped coffins rather than coming home to a homecoming celebration. And it's a trauma that's been going on now for 2 years and still happening. But even in the midst of the tragedies, God's hand is still at work. And what we need to be doing is relying on God's word to know that, okay, until the Lord returns to set up his kingdom, all the politicians in the world that are coming up with various peace deals and various ideas and trying to solve the world's problems, that the problem of the world will only be solved when the Messiah returns and sets up his kingdom. So in the meantime, when we're living in this fallen world, we need to be looking for ways that we can be the hands and the feet of Jesus to help meet people's needs, but also the voice of Jesus proclaiming God's word to this generation so that people have no excuse when they are told God's word, when they are shown God's word and how God's word is actively being fulfilled in our day and time. If they choose to reject God, even in spite of all the evidence, that they have no excuse. We've done our part in sharing the truth with people. So we continue, even now, and for as long as it takes, to not only keep proclaiming what God's word says about here and now and about the future, about truth versus the clever lies that the world tries to swallow, but we also continue to be the hands and feet and the voice of God, crying out to a lost world that Jesus died to save. That's the thing about it. Jesus has paid the sin penalty for all of mankind. But it requires mankind individually saying yes to Jesus, admitting, I'm a sinner. God, I need you. I need to conform my life to you, to accept that offer of salvation. So here it is, 2 years later, and the war goes on, and people are still suffering. But there are still also people who are being the hands and feet of Jesus in the world today. And just like today, people are undergoing the economic stresses of a lot of people have been laid off, and there's a government shutdown, and we don't know what the outcome will be, how long we'll be in this situation. People go through tough times every day. They go through the loss of loved ones. They go through economic hardships. Sometimes they get a bad health report. Various kinds of ways that life rears up and bites us. We have to have the kind of faith in God that gets us through the tough times, to where we can admit, hey, right now I'm going through a tough time, I have needs, and be willing to be on the receiving end of someone else's mercy and love for us, because they're doing it in Jesus' name. And that there are times when we're called upon to do some sacrificing ourselves to meet other people's needs. As long as we're here on this fallen, broken world, we need to understand the atoning work of Christ and our calling to be his ambassadors in a world that's broken, and do our best to help heal the wounds. Thanks for watching.